Celeb Savant is a career retrospective type interview focusing on singers, actors, and industry experts. Join Barrett Edelstein now as he dives into the entertainment world.
Stacy Widelitz is an American composer, musician, and photographer. His first taste of success was a composition for the national TV theme for The Richard Simmons Show, which became a hit. He scored more daytime TV themes and eventually some primetime shows. He next scored a film called Chicken Thing, which was a huge success, winning 30 awards around the world. The next part of his journey saw Stacy become friends with Patrick Swayze. Patrick had an idea for a song and asked if Stacy would work on it with him. That idea became She's Like the Wind, which ended up being on the soundtrack for Dirty Dancing. The next 19 years saw Stacy score some films and a lot of TV shows. He had a major hit song from a soundtrack album and picked up an Emmy nomination along the way. The next part of his journey saw Stacy move to Nashville, where he ran for office and served for 4 years as commissioner in the city of Oak Hill. He served as board president for the National Film Festival, Elias Chamber Ensemble, Leadership Music, and Nashville Opera. He is currently the president of the Nashville Opera Guild. A few years back, Stacy got a good camera and started taking photos on a trip to Tuscany. He continued this hobby of photography on trips to Cuba, Washington, New Orleans, New York, London, and Berlin. This journey has led him to get a show and artist representation at the Arts Company, now rebranded as Chauvet Arts. Up next on Celeb Savant, we've got Stacy Widelitz. Where in the world are you and how are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's a sunny day here in Nashville, Tennessee, and I'm actually sitting at my piano, which is the right height for a Zoom meeting, with my dog sitting on my lap.
Okay, so now it's been a multi-decade journey in the entertainment world in different facets and different ways. So at what age, whether you was a child or teenager, did you feel cool? I want to be in this creative world. And your hybrid journey, how did that go?
I started playing piano when I was 8 after a disastrous episode in the school band in 4th grade when I was actually flunked from the band program. I had been assigned the flute, and the music teacher sent me home with a note to my parents that he was dropping me from the program because I exhibited no musical ability whatsoever. And so, but then a few months later, I sat down with my cousin at the piano. He was a child prodigy classical pianist, and he gave me my first lesson, and everything just clicked. He told my parents I needed piano lessons, which they got me. I was always around the arts. My parents weren't professional artists. They were kind of wannabes in a way. My mother had studied acting in New York, never really pursued it professionally, but she did a lot of local theater. And so she was in plays, and, as soon as we were of age, she would take my brother and me to Broadway and, to the museums in New York City. And my father was into the visual arts. And both of them listened to a lot of music of all different varieties. So it was around me all the time. And so I think it was around 13 or so that I started thinking, okay, I think this is what I want to do with myself, much to my parents' horror. By the time I was 15, I was actually already playing professionally in clubs. And at 15, also got a special dispensation from the New York Musicians Union to join them, even though I was a year underage. I continued with that, went to college for a couple of years as a music major. In college, I got hooked up with a little recording studio in Connecticut, and I was experimenting with synthesizers and tapes at the time, and they heard some of that stuff, and they hired me to start writing music for little projects that they were doing. And that expanded into writing local jingles, music for industrial shows, educational films. And so really by the time I was 20, I was now also a professional composer. It was my jazz piano teacher, Lou Stein, that had a heart-to-heart talk with me. And he said, you're a really good piano player, but if you ask me, your path is as a composer. And it turned out he had written some very famous jingles, made a ton of money. And he had a jazz workshop on Monday nights that I was writing music for, so he was aware of what I was doing. And I took it to heart. I realized he's right. And so around that time, I quit college because I was working. And I thought, what do I need a degree for? And I just continued to work. From there, this would be late 70s, 1980 or so. I was doing a lot of different things with the music. I was still playing clubs. I was an in-demand accompanist in the cabaret world on piano. I had a way of working with singers. And I had the chance, actually it was my girlfriend and I, Wendy Fraser, who comes into the story in a bit as well. We were given a shot to submit a theme for a new TV show. I was 24 and she was 23. So this is 1980. And we got it. We submitted a theme that everybody liked. And we got the call that we were going to fly to LA to record it, which terrified me. It was out of my comfort zone being from New York. The show unexpectedly became a hit, which was the Richard Simmons show, the old exercise show on television. Yeah. Wendy and I started talking about it, and this was a great opportunity to kind of rise up in the business. But in order to take advantage of it, we realized we really needed to move to Los Angeles because it was an LA-based show, which didn't hold much water in New York, and there wasn't a lot of ways to really capitalize on it in New York. So we made the momentous decision to move. And so a year after the show came out, we made the move to Los Angeles. We actually did not expect to work for at least another 6 months. That was just the way it kind of worked. We had a foot in the door, but we figured we're going to have to continually try to prove ourselves. But we actually landed another television theme within 3 weeks of arriving there, which was for Regis Philbin's first talk show. And that, sort of launched things. That was the beginning of the Los Angeles period of my life.
When you create a theme song for a television show, is it a situation that you are briefed, or how do you individually tackle that scenario?
Yes, it's after multiple conversations with the producers, the creators. The way you work in commercial music is emotionally. You get a description or you watch a video or a scene, and how I react emotionally to it is how I then want other people to react through the music. So happy, sad, whatever. It's after a lot of consultation, a lot of hand wringing over, is this ready to submit? And then you play it for them and you just see if they like it or not.
Back in the day, in the 80s and 90s and early 2000s, even I say up to mid-2010s, there was always the theme song as part of the show. It was maybe a bit of a show, then the theme song. And that seems to be dissolved now because people their attention span is so short. That's like, okay, get rid of that. We need to go straight into the programming. What are your thoughts around that change in the viewing?
It's a shame to me because, I think of classic shows, especially from the 60s. Well, a lot from the 70s, too. You think of the 70s, you think of the opening to All in the Family with the two of them at the piano singing that great song. Or the Mary Tyler Moore show theme was just an absolute classic, which there's actually a great punk version of that, just high-speed heavy metal. And then the Dick Van Dyke Show. And, one of the classics that I actually used later on when I had to write a theme for a cartoon series was the Gilligan's Island theme.
Yeah.
Which told the entire story of the show concisely in 58 seconds. And that's very hard to do.
Let's go into your LA period of your journey. Let's dive into that.
It's not like they're a next step. It's like a series of zigging and zagging. It's kind of, you see opportunities. I talk to students sometimes, young students, in music and creative arts. And I say, it's great to be focused, but don't forget the periphery, because a lot of life is on the periphery. And maybe if you're looking too straight ahead, you miss it. So I always view it as I'm zigging and zagging through the industry. If you're lucky, there are some happy coincidences or happy circumstances. But the trick is, you may be lucky to get that opportunity, but you better be prepared to grab it. The next big thing that happened was Wendy and I were living in a part of LA, the Miracle Mile district. This is probably 1983 or something. And I had a friend from New York who was a very good musical comedy actor. And he called me because he knew I was an accompanist. And he said, I want to do a musical scene in my acting class, in which he was a student. And he said, will you play piano for me? And I said, sure. So we rehearsed it. We did it at his theater school. And it was a very famous teacher named Milton Katselas. And it turned into a discussion about musical theater. And Milton brought me into the conversation. And we talked about music as part of theater and all this. Anyway, there were about 60, 65 students in the class. And some I could recognize, like a young Alec Baldwin was in the class. Tom Selleck was in the class. Even President Reagan's daughter, Patty, was in the class.
Wow. Okay.
So there are always Secret Servicemen at the front and back doors. We did the scene, and then this guy came up to me, and he said in kind of this husky Texas voice, he said, "Hi, I'm Buddy. I really liked what you were saying about music and theater, and I really like your playing." And I'm looking at him, and I finally said to him, I said, you look really familiar. And he said, well, have you seen the movie The Outsiders? And I said, no. And then he said, have you seen Renegades? And I said, no. And so he's now getting a little annoyed. And I said, no, it's not that kind of, it's like I've seen you around familiar. And then this blonde woman came over, long blonde hair. And he said, this is my wife, Lisa. And I said, oh, now I know. The two of you are always working on a black 240Z on La Jolla Avenue on the weekends. And they said, yeah, how do you know that? And I said, I live right around the block from you, like 2 houses away from you. So I'm always passing you when I'm driving down La Jolla. And so the 4 of us started hanging, me, Wendy, who was, again, great musician, great singer. And I had a background of doing some music for dance, and both of them were dancers. But Buddy was Patrick Swayze. I always knew him as Buddy because that's what friends and family called him. To this day, if I have communication with his wife, Lisa, which is often, we refer to him as Buddy. It's never Patrick. But anyway, the 4 of us became friends. About a year after our initial meeting, he was working on a movie called Grandview, USA, with Jamie Lee Curtis and Tommy Howell. And he called me, said, hey, they're looking for songs for Grandview. I've had this idea for a song. I can't get anywhere with it. You want to work on it with me? He knew, obviously, I was writing music for TV and my musical background by that point. And I said, yeah, sure, come on over. I mean, he lived around the block. He came over with his guitar. He played some guitar and had been in bands, and he had been on Broadway and Grease, so musically adept. So he only had 2 chords, but he had lots of 4-line verses. And the first verse that he read to me or sang to me was, she's like the wind through my tree, she rides the night next to me. And I liked those 2 lines, but I didn't like the 3rd and 4th lines, which I said. And he said a little defensively, well, what would you say? So I thought for a minute, and I was thinking, nature. And I said, she leads me through moonlight only to burn me with the sun. And he kind of just looked at me. He says, what does that mean? And I said, I don't care. Just write it down. And then we were off and running, and we started to move it to different places musically. So it's not just 2 chords. I was at the piano. And I think the breakthrough was when we realized that She's Like the Wind could actually be the hook of the song and the title, and not just the opening line. So we did a really good demo of it with him singing it, Wendy doing some background stuff and this little duet with him. I programmed the synths and drums, and brought in a guitarist. We did just an excellent demo. And ultimately was not used for that movie, which I was eventually very thankful for. Because then a couple of years later, it got picked up for the soundtrack of Dirty Dancing.
And I'm loving listening to the stories and all these journeys. Obviously, the way that music is created has changed over the years that you've been creating. With the advent of technology, do you feel that it's enhanced or taken away some of the authenticity of music?
It's done a little of both. It's made the creative process more accessible. I mean, think about Billie Eilish sitting in her bedroom with her brother, making these incredible records that she makes. You know, there's so much that can be done there. And I was an early adopter of technology because I got my first synthesizer when I graduated high school. That's a really long time ago.
Okay.
And then I got a second synthesizer and I had a 4-track tape machine. So I was creating music that way. And then with the advent of MIDI technology for synthesizer, where you could link them together and then drive them on a computer, which started like 83, 84, I think, with the first Mac Classic. And there were programs that were coming out. I loved it. I was all over it because I loved the fact that I could create an entire orchestration on my own and not have to wait to be in front of a whole bunch of musicians.
Yeah.
The downside is some of the artificiality. Like I hate auto-tune with a passion that, especially in contemporary country music, they don't sound like people when they're singing. And so I love the authenticity of, say, a great Frank Sinatra recording, or even, Linda Ronstadt. It's the slight imperfections that make it so great. It's like, Photoshop. It's like, did you really make that woman look more beautiful in that glamour photo by just airbrushing her to death, or whatever the technology, or would there be more authenticity if you left her more natural? So it's the same thing with vocals and with production. There can be a sameness to it. So I think the better people rise above that.
Interesting. Now, what have you been working on? What's coming up over the next period?
I took one of those zigs that I was talking about about 9.5 years ago. That was music related. I was growing up. I was always a huge movie fan, and I especially loved old black and white movies and film noir stuff like The Third Man and Kiss of Death, and then dramatic Citizen Kane and the original Hunchback of Notre Dame with Charles Lawton. And the black and white photography was so beautiful. And my parents always had books of some of the great photographers lying, or coffee table books. Anyway, I was slated to go to Italy for the very first time, to Tuscany, for a songwriter workshop that a friend of mine had organized. And I was going as a student because the woman leading the workshop is one of my favorite writers, named Gretchen Peters. And I know her husband, who's a great keyboard player, and he was coming. My friend Lydia, who organized the whole thing, she was coming. And I looked at the itinerary. It was just great. We were all going to be staying at this beautiful villa 15 minutes outside of Florence. And we were going to take some trips into the countryside and then have these songwriter workshops. A week before the trip, I realized I always took pictures traveling with this crappy little camera and and my phone. And I thought, I need a better camera. I'm going to do this. So somebody recommended this Sony travel one-shot camera with a built-in Zeiss lens. Great. I was trying it out and it took great photos. But then I found in its menu, it had a setting called high contrast monochrome, which suddenly turned the camera high contrast black and white. And I looked through the viewfinder, and all of a sudden I'm in an old movie. And so I had a free day in Florence, and I was wandering by myself through the streets of Florence, all of a sudden focusing on people rather than buildings. I started taking pictures of people in cafes or on the street or whatever. It was fun, number one. And then I looked at a couple of the photos and I thought, I swear to God, I think these are really good photos. And I'm intensely self-critical. And then I showed them to my friend Lydia and I said, look at these. And she said, yeah, I think they're good photos. So anyway, I posted a few of them to Facebook. And when I got back to Nashville, so this is the fall of 2015, I have a neighbor who's one of the best photographers in Nashville, Jerry. And I was walking my dog through the neighborhood, and he pulled up his car and rolled down the window and asked me if I had been posting archival photos from Italy. And so I said, no, if you mean the black and white, I took those photos. So he looked at me, he said, you took those photos? And I said, yeah, why? And he said, well, they're really good. And now you need to start bringing a camera with you whenever you travel and do this because you're on to something. So I did. Then I think my next trip was to Washington, D.C., and I went around taking pictures, New Orleans, D.C., Havana, Cuba, and then eventually back to Italy in 2018. When I got back from that trip, I got a couple printed out at a professional place that my neighbor recommended. And when I went to pick up the prints, the woman there looked at me and she said, did you take these photos? And I said, yeah, why? And she said, do you have more like this? And I said, yeah, a bunch now. And she said, okay, there's an art store around the block. Go there, buy a portfolio, start getting more printed out and fill up the portfolio because we think you're onto something. And so I did. And then I showed it to a art director of an art space here in Nashville called Oz Arts. And Lauren looked and said, you need your own show. These are great. And I said, you're kidding. She said, no, I'm telling you, you need your own show. I know a gallery owner. Well, at the time, she was gallery owner for one of the biggest galleries downtown Nashville called the Arts Company. And I called her a little, trepidatiously saying, can you look at these photos? And I heard this pause on the other end, like, are you kidding me? And she said, send me a couple or send me 3 or 4 first. So I did. And then I heard back from her within a couple of hours. She emailed me back from her iPhone saying, impressive and in a very particular way, which was a little, what does that mean? And then she said, let's set up a meeting. I can't wait to see more. So I met with her. She looked through the portfolio and it was funny. She turned to me and she said, tell me again how this happened. So I said, basically, I bought a camera, went to Italy and started taking pictures of people in black and white. And so she said, well, it's incredible. What do you want to do? And I said, well, Lauren said I should have a show. That seems a little implausible at this point. And Anne just said, no, I'm doing your show. And so the following year, we had started the planning and process and curation. And I had my first one-man show at the gallery and sold a few pieces. And I've now had 4 shows, including one at Nashville Airport. And I've won, I think, 7 awards now. And
oh, wow.
I have gallery representation. What's fun also is I belong to these street photography groups on Facebook where I'm interacting with photographers from all over the world. And they know who I am. Like when I was in London, we hung out, had tea, and then did a little walk around South Kensington taking pictures. So it's turned into this whole world that I never, in my wildest dreams, expected. And it brought out a talent in me that I never thought I had. I always thought, oh, it's just about the music. I'm not a visual artist.
Yes.
So it's fun, but it's related. And because it's all storytelling and emotion.
While you're doing all this photographic stuff, are you still creating or music, or is your focus purely on the photographic side?
Well, I'm sitting here at a piano right now.
Of course. So yeah,
it's
it must be used.
Yeah, it must be used. It's in my living room and it's 9 feet long, so you can't miss the damn thing.
Okay,
and also I'm in talks with this gallery that's representing me, were beginning to plot out a show there of my work from overseas because I've been traveling extensively now.
Yes.
It kind of put a bug underneath me. And one of the ideas I had, which they like, is that I would write all the music for the gallery. So that it's almost like I'm scoring your experience as you're walking through. And then in the back room, we may project photos that are, fade into one another. And I'd write music for that as well on a loop. When you've been doing something since you're a kid, it's just always there. But it's fun. I've fallen in love with Paris, and I've been there 5 times in the last 2 years. And I'm going back, and I met a poet there, a very talented woman named Claire Medard. So we're working on a book together of my photos of Paris, and she's writing poems based on the photos.
Oh, wow. That's fantastic.
Yeah,
that sounds like a lovely collaboration. Yes.
Yeah, it's fun, and studying French, so I get to try that out and curse out people here in the States. But
I'll give you some Afrikaans words. So you can...
Oh, okay. I know one Afrikaans word.
Yes.
Because my trainer sometimes uses. I said, "How many push-ups do you want me to do?" And he'll say, 20.
20. That's 20. Yes. My Afrikaans is not great, but I know that much. I love that. So I love the story is just basically that being aware of those zigs and zags and noticing them, because it can flourish into something that a person could never, ever realize was an opportunity. So I love that message of that whole story.
I think it's really been the through line for me that, when I make these interconnections, it's like, how did I meet this person? How did that lead to this?
Yes.
Like I met Patrick Swayze through the actor that I knew in New York. And on She's Like the Wind, if you listen to the original version, there's a woman that comes in opposite Patrick for like this duet at the end. That was my girlfriend, Wendy. She sang on the final version as well, and got a credit on the album as well. How did I get to Italy? It's through my friend Lydia, whom I know because I went through a program here in Nashville called Leadership Music, and she was one of my classmates. And so, we became very close through that. So, there really is something to be said for the power of networking. When I say networking, I don't mean I'm going to go to this event at a restaurant and everybody's going to be holding drinks and exchanging business cards.
Yes,
that's corporate networking.
Yeah.
When you're in a creative field, as I've been freelance my whole life, it's more like you get to know people. All right, this person knows that person. So how can I get to that person? Or how can this person I'm talking to and I collaborate? And like with Patrick and Lisa, not only did Patrick and I do She's Like the Wind together, before Dirty Dancing came out, actually in 1985, they did a stage piece at that place, the Beverly Hills Playhouse, with a third dancer, Nick Gunn, and it was called Without a Word. And they brought me into it to write some music, play piano and synth live in it. I also edited all these tapes of conversation. And there was also a percussionist in the show, M.B. Gordy, whom, again, I shake my head at the world sometimes. I was in Los Angeles for the first time in a number of years last weekend, and he was performing in my hotel.
Oh, wow.
With a group that he has with the violinist Lily Hayden, whom I also know. And they have a band called Opium Moon, which is fantastic. But how weird that I run into him randomly.
Exactly.
And he's setting up with his band in the hotel. Yeah, so it's all those meanderings of chance and, and just keeping your mind open.
So, Stacy, the podcast is listened to throughout the world. As a final message, what would you like to say?
World peace. Don't give up on America. We're going through a moment of insanity in my mind.
Yeah.
So forgive us our trespasses, and we'll all get through it together. I would say that, number one, I'm very I'm a little perturbed by what's going on, but the people will speak, and they're already beginning to speak because this did not go the way I won't mention his name.
Yeah.
His supporters wanted it to go. But anyway, I would say, let's all just be compassionate and continue to be creative. Just make great music. One of the greatest equalizers of all people in the world is music. Just real briefly, I met a guy who wanted to do a documentary. He said, it's a really radical idea. I want to take musicians from South America and country musicians and see how long it takes them to come up with something. And I said, you'll have no documentary. And he said, what do you mean? I said, it's going to take them approximately 3 minutes to start playing together because they all speak a universal language.
Exactly.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Celeb Savant. Please follow Barrett on TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook at Celeb Savant. That's CelebSavant.